This meeting is now being recorded.
Hey guys, just so you know, the meeting is now being recorded, so.
Oh. Here, quick.
We're in like fast as a gas.
There you go. I'm sorry, we have enough seats, so you can sit over here.
I'll do that.
Wow, Hunter. I can't believe I got to take your seat. You actually took your seat.
Be careful what you wish for.
All right, why don't we go around the room and do introductions. We'll start with Warren.
Warren Tenney with Arizona Municipal Water Users Association.
Sarah Porter from Untitled Water Policy.
Ron Dobon with NAMWA.
Martin Stiles, ADWR.
Zach Richards, AWR. Hunter Moore, Governor's Office.
Cheryl Lombard, Valley Partnership. Terry Walker, ADWR.
Stuart Peckham, SRP.
Scott Miller with ATS.
Black with AMLA.
And I'm Sandy Favored-Whitney with Freeport Moran. All right. Today, our agenda, we're going to go back over the planning area study that we discussed at our last meeting. There's been some updates to it that the DWR's been working on based on the conversations that we had at the last meeting. Ron is so nice to join us today, and I hope he continues to. He's going to give us a little bit of background on what was done at the WRDC, and then DWR is also going to go over some of the funding mechanisms that were discussed in that process. What I'd like to do out of that is to identify potential funding sources that we would like to maybe explore a little further. And it doesn't have to be on this list. I want to start getting ideas of things that we need to start looking at a little more closely. If there are things on the list that we don't want to look at, I'd like to hear from you as well, because I think that's really important as we move forward. That's always been sort of a stumbling block in previous commissions and other groups, so I want to make sure that we are very clear on what we want to look at. It doesn't mean that those things won't come back. It just means that we want to explore some of these a little more closely. Okay? And then we'll be able to schedule a little more clearly maybe speakers for the next meeting or updates on certain sources that we may want to explore a little further. I am not an expert on these things. The only one that I've had direct involvement in is the bottled water tax. I've got the scars still to prove it. But let's look at these and see, what we want to look at further, because I can't discuss financing mechanisms with anybody. I barely balance my own checkbook. I think it would at least be helpful to me. And if it's not helpful for the group, let me know. But I think it might be. Right. All right, Martin.
Thanks, Sandy. So last week I sent out this document in an email to everyone on our stakeholder list. If you did not get that email, please let me know. We had some requests from some GWAP council members who are not on this committee to not send it out to all the committee. They just prefer to not get spammed by ADWR every week or so. So if you did not get this via email, please let me know, and I will make sure that you get that. I do not have this printed out, but this is the same version that was sent out to the committee. What we have done since the last meeting, let me back up. So this is an analysis that was requested by the committee last October to look at future demands for the planning areas. Where do we need, basically, where are we going to focus our efforts? What area has the greatest need for water augmentation in the state, and where is that most fiscally possible? So we looked at a number of different things to calculate some metrics that allow us to compare planning areas to each other. And if you would like more information about how those are calculated, that was presented at the last meeting, so there's some great materials on our website. But also I'm happy to talk with you later about how we arrive at these conclusions. So let's just start with some of the updates that have happened since last time. We have, by request, added the Basin and Range AMA, which you can see in this row, and we have also, you'll notice that there's no, in column E, there's no metric for opportunity for water supply augmentation. This was left out for the basin and range because it's not calculable. If you calculate that metric for basin and range, everything else becomes a 0 and it becomes a 1 because obviously the budget for the AMAs or the tax base in the AMAs is much higher than you would see in other parts of the state. So I left that out just so we can still kind of compare planning areas, keeping in mind that you would basically see all zeros and just a 1 here if we were to include basin and range for fiscal opportunity for water supply augmentation.
Is there a chance that maybe perhaps we could put that as a 1 and maybe asterisk it?
Yeah, that's it. Yes, absolutely.
Just because of the, that is, it does fall out as the largest gap. Or maybe there's some way to do that. I mean, you just,
Put it as a 1. Don't want to calculate.
I mean, it's not going to hurt to have 2 1s in there.
That sounds good. In fact, I might have, so there's a number of tabs here. We listed out all of the tasks that were assigned and how the data analysis kind of answers those questions, and then list of assumptions, and by use sector. So and another update from last meeting to this meeting is we also took all those planning areas and broke them out by ag and then M&I. So you can kind of see what sectors are using the water in each of those planning areas. And then finally, this is a table you saw at the last meeting, except for it has the AMAs included. And I think I actually did go back and add, so on this one I did put a value as 1. So I did go back and do that. And I think, so that's exactly what I did here. I can go back and do that by use sector as well.
That's okay then.
And this table called reordered data on the final tab is just sorting that data set by each of the major metrics. So it's sorted by projected total balance or imbalance for 2035. It's sorted by, this section sorted by the urgency metric, and this is sorted by the ability to pay. So just going back to the use sector, this is kind of a more useful way to look at this data if we look at what sectors are using water where. So, does anyone have any questions about those?
Could you describe the simplified urgency metric a little more?
Yes, I'm going to cheat and read the actual definition that I wrote so I can do that right. So this value transforms the values found in our master data sheet, which was made available at the last meeting, to a range of values from 0 to 1. So it standardizes them from 0 to 1. 0 being least urgent and 1 being most urgent. The assumptions made for this project reflect our best attempts to estimate the projected imbalances and declines for aquifers and the financial resources available for augmenting water supplies in individual planning areas, and this takes into account the population of each planning area. So this includes population, it accounts for population, it also accounts for aquifer storage and demand for each of those areas. Any other questions?
So on the reordered data, Martin, so basically the first set are, which one is one of them just ag use and then one of them M&I?
These are summed. This is all use, total use, for all 3 use sectors. It's broken out here by use sector, and it's just sorted by...
alphabetically.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So it might be helpful for me to go through and just resort that by each metric for each use sector.
Because the most urgency in the ag one is, if it's with not sorted, that would be useful.
So, in the basin and range, Martin, so M&I is 2.7 billion acre feet deficit.
Mm-hmm.
And then is it cumulative with that another 1.7 million acre feet, or is that part of?
You would add them together to have the total deficit.
So the total deficit is 3.
Oh, wait.
Those others are 700,000 or 268,000.
Oh, it's 260.
Yeah.
I was adding a digit.
Yeah.
Those decimal points matter.
They should, yeah. They should total to this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where's it?
It looks like there might be a few. Let me look. I'll have to go back and make sure that that's accurate. Thank you for pointing that out.
2 million, roughly 2.
Could you
300,000.
just make them numbers? So you got the commas there.
Yeah.
It's not a million.
Yeah. Still, I think
Should be, it's less than 500,000.
70,000 plus 200.
There you go, thank
There
you
we
very
go.
much. I moved the decimals out, just click the rectangle. Thank you.
There we go.
There.
So I don't know how to make those not absolute numbers, but parenthetically is negative.
No, that's clear.
That's better.
There we go.
Thanks.
Yeah, no, of course.
All right.
Martin, the 2035 numbers that are used in the projections, what iteration of projections are those based on? Where are they coming from?
So those are the, now you're testing my memory of doing this 6 months ago. I have this written down, so I might have to go back and go through my notes and
I think
get back
I
to you.
remember. I think the 2035 for the non-planning areas that we're working in right now was just the WRDC data that was
So WRDC.
translated into the strategic vision data.
Yes.
But I do believe did you update in the planning area?
For the planning areas, yeah, that we are working in. Now, the aquifer storage, it was made available in the Water Atlas.
Yeah.
So that we basically took the most recent data set for each category we could. That's not ideal. Obviously, it'd be great to have 1 year for everything, but this is an estimate of estimates, if you will.
So there are 3 planning areas you're working in that have updated information. This will be WRDC as integrated into the strategic vision.
That's correct.
I was noticing that industrial numbers have gone up because there's better data available. Do you anticipate industrial deltas across the board, or have you picked the planning area? I mean, like is that area particularly subject to higher changes in that?
I would hate to say what I think is going to happen because the second I do that, I'm probably wrong. But
The projections.
We're all wrong.
Our projections. But
They're never wrong.
But the basis,
They're always wrong.
what the industrial demands were based on in the WRDC work was primarily based on USGS efforts, and they intentionally only looked at specific industrial uses. So I would say, I think across the board, the industrial uses are going to be higher. The actual industrial uses are going to be higher in the planning areas just because we're looking at
Taking in turf,
Right.
farms, dairies, whatever, chicken farms, and
In some of those planning areas when we were doing the WRDC, though, there was some input, I think, from some of the industrial uses added to GS numbers. So you'll see it'll vary. I
okay,
think.
so it's kind of going to shake out a little bit.
Yeah, it was
But-
based
some of
on
them are
estimates at that
range.
time.
Could
Yeah.
any projections about where that might be significant? Like would we expect that to be much higher in Pinell County, for example? I mean, as a percentage of the total imbalance?
Well, in the AMAs, the projections for the AMAs were not, in the WRDC work, was not done in the same
Yeah.
way that everything else was. So it was...
The CWR had the data for that.
Okay, that's good. That's good.
So there really aren't
a lot of places in the states where the better data about industrial use will make a big difference.
I do not believe it's going to be significant. Well, and I've
There may be
learned
some areas of
to not say
change.
significant to them.
When we went,
Let's keep that
You
here.
say that one time.
Yeah, the industrial is the hardest one to project because it's a function of, when you're asking, when you're doing them at the time, it's based on the economy at the time.
Yeah.
And I think back when we were doing the WRDC, the economy was pretty depressed.
Not too good, yes.
And just to add on to that, after going through the industrial use sector for each of the planning areas, just really quickly, based off the WRDC data, a lot of the projections were extremely high. And we would just look at mines that at the time were open, but were absolutely closed more recently, probably because of economic changes. So we I think we might have taken a lower estimate for industrial for some of the planning areas just based on a quick Google search, maybe a couple, asking some hydrologists.
Yeah, and that's why there was the range too. When you go back to the strategic vision, there was a range because people, they weren't comfortable giving a single sort of approach run. Wasn't that the case, as I recall?
Yes.
Particularly in the industrial sector.
Which I know Ron and Leslie were opposed to, but they let them slide.
It didn't start out that way, but wound up that way.
Bob, I will go in and take a look at that discrepancy on the AMAs and get back to you on that.
So on the metric of opportunity for water supply augmentation, why don't you talk through that just a little bit? I think it's pretty evident, but...
So again, we standardized these from 0 to 1 to allow us to compare planning areas to each other. These were, so what we did is we looked at tax bases basically in each of the planning areas. We looked at the 3 largest incorporated municipalities because a lot of planning areas don't have very many incorporated municipalities. So we took the 3 largest and totaled them together, and then we included, but only their budgets for water resource type projects, so sewage, reclaimed water projects, anything that was related to utilities in regards to water resources, and then we also had capital projects that we included just to be generous, and then we also included, I think, natural resources spending, which is often a very small percentage of a rural municipality budget. So we had the 3 largest cities, we had the county, and then we had, I think that was it. So we totaled those budgets, and then there's a word I'm not going to be able to remember, which is a GIS term for separating those out appropriately by the planning area lines, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So we allocated them along the geographic boundaries to the planning areas. And then, of course, in reality, those populations don't necessarily exist. Those population centers might not be equally distributed throughout the planning area, so you have to take that with a grain of salt. But we just kind of wanted to get an idea of what kind of tax base was possible for spending real dollars on real projects in these areas. And then we also looked at the deficit that they would have projected for 2035, and using a collection of data from WIFA that showed how much different parts of the state pay for an acre foot of water, we calculate how much it would cost to make up that deficit by 2035. And so that tax base, or I guess the available income, or there's probably a better way to say that money that we calculated for that planning area, if it could make up the cost of acre foot per water for that looming deficit, then it would be less urgent or a lower number. But if it has a higher number,
So the closer to 1.
Right, so closer to 1 means you can't pay to meet your deficit by 2035. Closer to 0 means you might struggle to be able to pay for that water augmentation for that deficit.
When you say you can pay for it, that's using what sort of financing? Conventional financing that's available right now? Is that what we're saying?
Yes, and
just sale of bonds and loans and okay. So
or currently
so it's not
tax dollars.
So they've already got their financing mechanism in place then. Is that what we're saying?
I'm not going to answer that question.
I don't
They have the ability. They don't.
Move your chairs up here. You guys are
so the question was how do we assess who can pay for water augmentation, which is a really hard question to answer. So this is just kind of our best shot at that from the non.
That you believe that because they have the tax base that they are closer to or more capable.
Politically have an
Yes.
Yeah, but But for reasons, we haven't delved into on necessarily, are they willing?
But that's just one part of the metric
Yeah.
for opportunity for water supply.
Right.
Yes. The other part is, can they make up the deficit, the projected deficit in 2035?
Well,
Or how much would it cost to meet that deficit?
perhaps I misunderstood. I thought that this metric also included the possibility of even having access to some type of water supply that you were. No, you're only looking at the financial.
Yes.
Okay.
And that was coming out of the very first meeting, and
Okay.
Sarah so gratefully noted, that's really hard to do, but we wanted to at least take some kind of a shot at it. So it wasn't saying, yes, there's a supply there and it's going to cost this much to move it or build infrastructure. It didn't include any of that. It was just in 2035, there was a deficit. They have budgeted this amount at X dollars per acre foot to meet that deficit. How able would they, with what they've budgeted, be able
To fund it.
to fund that? Yeah, just straight dollar per acre foot volume, nothing else.
Did you look, because I know we ran into this in my old job, we were looking in Yavapai County. Did you look at what bond limits had already been used?
No,
Okay,
it didn't.
that's what I thought.
That would be a great, on the next iteration, it'd be
Right,
nice to go
okay.
into that level of detail.
And I do have to chime in that as Sandy can't balance her checkbook, neither can I. We are not financial people. We are water people. And so
If there's other ways, or if you have insight or thoughts,
We have talked about maybe getting a couple financial people here.
Yeah, and that's,
Okay, it's on the agenda. But the other thing is that the Kyle Center is looking at working with some Cary School folks on some of the financing questions, and maybe at some point we can just maybe talk about that, because maybe we could plug that work into this. This is really good work.
yeah, no, it's excellent. I think it's a really good first start, so it's helpful to see sort of the...
Yeah.
So let me ask you a real general question. This is the first time I've seen this, and it's very interesting, but when I see a 1.0 for the Central Plateau that says that, financially, they've got the tax base, they can fund a project to meet their projected unmet demands, and then I see a 1.0 for Gila Bend on the simplified metric, that's telling me that they probably need it worse and they can afford it less. Is that what?
Yes. Yeah. No. Yeah. And again, this is an estimate of estimates. It's also an extreme situation where you can convince everyone in that area to all of a sudden change their budget to go to this.
Yeah, we haven't.
Unknown project.
There's been no look at what it would take to do that. To get to.
I think it was getting at ability to pay.
Yeah.
Was what.
That was the original term, right?
So you look at it and you say, it helps to have a tax base.
But that's the angle you can go. Now, willingness.
Willingness is another issue?
Yeah.
For the record, it might be helpful just to clarify. So that term is defined by calculated by multiplying the state population percentage of the planning area with the total planning area budget, and this number dictates the affordability of an augmentation project in a particular planning area.
Yeah, and each augmentation project is going to carry its own value, which may exceed even that.
Originally, Rick Lavis had asked that we actually look at each kind of augmentation, each type of augmentation in each planning area. And basically you could have any kind of augmentation in any planning area if you had unlimited money. So it becomes, it's more of a higher level of expertise to go past it.
But would there be any value in looking, at least in some of these areas, at likely augmentation strategies, or is that too...
Well, that's what the other group, Yeah, the other groups are due.
It's already done.
Vision has a lot of that.
WRDC did this.
Yeah.
Everybody put their
I have
wish
3
list.
I wasn't part of that. I read about 700 pages.
Well, some of these, I mean,
Wanna
for
see.
me, I look at these areas and I think of the information that my group put together and overlay the information on brackish groundwater supplies and ability to
Yeah.
do something with those, overlay it with this information, and now I got some useful information that
Good.
we can start working on together to say
Yeah,
some areas that actually we do have the ability to work on.
and I think the attempt was really to get this out to the other groups as
Yeah.
well, so they have, they can see where they need to focus.
Yeah, I was
Some
going
of
to
their
say
effort.
the long-term augmentation
Yeah.
group could really benefit from this, and we're always dancing around that challenge when you're talking about finances. What comes first, the project or the finance? And the WRDC struggled with that. I'm sure we'll continue to struggle with that.
Yeah.
Usually you need to have money to start a project is what I've found.
Yeah.
Yes.
Urgency.
Yeah.
Do both.
Right.
Good. Urgency creates,
Willingness.
well, potentially. Now, on the ag sector, if you go over to that one, were you using the municipal dollars or tax base for that as well?
Yeah, so that's going to be a problem.
Yeah, because those I would see closer to zero across the board.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm just,
That would be
I could be
interesting.
completely wrong.
I guess we could remove the cities and just use the
Unincorporated,
county
yeah.
tax base. Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know the best way to do that. But
Do you want me
it would,
to see what that looks like?
I don't. What other folks think?
I would say, at least as far as central, one of the basin range areas, municipalities, and the population basis, the ag programs still, I don't see anything wrong with keeping it
Okay.
municipal funding.
Other areas? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I just wasn't sure.
Should we include some sort of state funding for? Is there a better way, since everyone's here? Is there a better way to approach like budgets that could be dollars that could be thrown at this? Beyond just county capital projects and sewer and those kinds of utility budget dollars that are already allocated for those things?
I think it depends on the approach that you take, right? I mean,
Yeah.
if you have potentially an investment company come in and build the project and then sell the product to a local municipality, I mean, now you don't need tax revenue to support that, right? As long as there's a need in the community. I mean, you may be able to do it that way and get a project moving sooner than trying to convince our ratepayer tax base that we all need to pay for this project over here that they may not even get anything out of, right? That's always a struggle.
Mm-hmm. Maybe another just sort of column on there, and this just trying to get to closer to some answers is as you go through the planning areas, and I don't know how to do this, but we looked at, when we were doing this, we broke the planning areas down so that we were trying to look at ways were there natural ways, I don't know, opportunities for augmentation or their local supplies available to close some of those gaps. So we basically just took a map and said, what supplies could we get to these areas? Or were there supplies available in those areas to address any gap in supply and demand? And I don't know how you would do that here, but sort of look at the worst case scenario. When we were going through that was Cochise, just as an example. There's no local supplies. It's all groundwater. Groundwater was declining in the Cochise planning area. So they had less local supplies available and no surface water supplies coming in necessarily. I mean, they're just so limited in available water supplies. And this is how crude the analysis was. It was like their opportunity for local augmentation was really, really low. It's sort of low, medium, high is kind of how we looked at it. They had almost, what were they going to go to?
Right.
Where when you go to the basin and range one, at least for the Phoenix and Tucson AMA, their ability to access supplies was much greater. They were producing a lot of effluent. They had a lot of storage. They had CAP coming in. They had the opportunity the tax base or the population, there was more opportunity for augmentation. I don't know if that would be helpful or not.
So
it sort of helps, what areas, the idea was to try to get to what areas are really going to struggle doing augmentation. Cochise is on one end, the basin and range is on the other end. But, that was sort of our thought.
I think it's really helpful, and I think this idea of
I just don't know how to do
like
it here.
5 gradations of how these things is it category 1 through category 5 or something like that could be helpful.
I don't know if that I'd like to hear from you guys what you think. These are I think this stuff it will help focus I think some of the effort. Maybe not.
So the only thing I think about it is if you develop that and you say this area has a critical need and there's absolutely zero ability for augmentation, the property value in that area.
And that is a concern that I have, and we always heard that. You can't say that this area has a problem because you can't say that in public because it's gonna hurt us, but. How do we do our job without...
That's the reality.
Yeah.
So, and then the piece of the puzzle is how do we help that area?
Yeah, that's a good one.
I don't know if this is helpful, Sandy, but it made me think about this from last time, kind of what you were describing. And the urgency metric, after hearing you describe that, the urgency metric is somewhat similar to that, so maybe we're looking for something more simplified, but the urgency metric looked at surface water physically there. Yeah. So obviously those water rights, as Mr. Roberts brought up last time, exist somewhere else. But physically available surface water, is there CAP water, what is the current aquifer estimated storage? So that versus demand is kind of what I heard you just say, like all types of water in that area are available to be moved easily, whatever that means. I guess readily available to move into that area. So maybe there's a way to. I also included population though. So maybe there's another look at that where population is excluded and we just look at groundwater and demand, or
I don't know. Yeah, it's a hard metric to try to evaluate, but. And like Bob said, it's a very dangerous thing to do. People get really scared by having that out there.
Well, but I think this does help kind of address both sides of your concern. One, it raises concerns. It points out the areas that need some looking at. It doesn't say right out that they're going dry.
No, you avoid that, definitely.
But you still leave in there the reality that once you take into all this issues going on, including supply, these are the areas that need to be addressed.
Yeah, and it's messaging too. It's like, that's why we're doing this, to address it.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's why there's urgency.
But when we talk about coming up with a funding mechanism, still, even though we're identifying these priority areas of the state, the funding mechanism itself is going to have to be something that's available on a statewide basis. Because, we've heard it before where we don't want to pay for your problem, and you don't want to pay for my problem, and that sort of thing. So there's got to be, it is, that needs to be established that way, in that manner.
Yeah.
But it has to be something that's going to be available to everybody.
And I think that's an important distinction. Even pulling out the ag and municipal separately almost begs that question: are we focusing on municipal? Are we focused on ag? Are we focusing on both? Are we looking for funding sources that are available statewide? Are we trying to focus funding sources to particular areas? It's going to vary all over the place. So, everybody's going to have their own sort of interpretation of, sort of what all these things mean.
And some people who have a problem don't hear about it.
Yeah. Yeah, some are like, leave it alone.
People say we should just live within our means. And
yeah, absolutely.
Population control.
Yeah.
That was off the record.
For the purposes of the recording, Bob Lotz didn't mean to say that.
I meant growth control.
So, just kidding. All right. So for the next iteration, what are some thoughts? Is this helpful? Is it?
I think it's helpful. I think there's, it really starts putting pieces together. I like what Ron was saying. So what is the goal of the council, right? How do we, what is the messaging we want to create? Is this, do we want this, and I think that's the reason this group is together, this is a statewide issue. And so we're not focusing on one area of the state or one sector of the state. And do we need to communicate that we have multiple opportunities for augmentation of our water supplies in different areas of the state to target different sectors so that it is not, I don't want to pay for them. It is, we're all in this together, and we all contribute a little bit, we can move this rock forward. And so, I think that is...
I guess I would want that to be tempered with that we need to do that in a smart way. That there, there are smart ways of getting the water to where it's needed, and then there are a lot of different ways we could be thinking about it. I was really struck thinking at the last GWAC meeting, thinking, these days we have this dairy, just thinking about the industrial numbers. Dairy is water intensive, but it has traditionally been close to the market, one day away from the market. Mm-hmm. And we live in a time when we don't necessarily have to do that. So should we invest a lot in transportation infrastructure that allows us to get dairy close to the market and not the water instead, or do we invest in the water? There really are, that's kind of one dumb little example, but there are choices about what are the smart augmentation opportunities. That's why I like the P3 influence, because the equity, private equity is going to look at that.
So they're going to look at the return on investment.
Exactly.
That's where we need to look at it.
So, but at least that's, it's one way of looking at what's smart or not. But the idea, we have to, I think, it is something we all share to make sure that we are assisting communities and having the water they need, but it isn't at any cost, it isn't to any place, obviously, but we have to be sure to temper.
That's the fun part of it. Mapping that out, making sure we're doing
the
things
smart ones.
With the best solution in mind for the people that live in this state and will be here to succeed us, right?
Well, there might be the reality that some areas we're just not going to be able to change the situation because of a number of factors. That does not mean that Arizona is running out of water. It means that Arizona is protecting and making certain that people are aware of the reality so that smart decisions are made and water then doesn't become a problem in the future. And somehow, and it's a hard message to get just right and to balance, but there's some areas that it just may be hard to find an augmentation.
The cost effectiveness.
Yeah.
And you can get water anywhere, but you got to pay for it.
Right.
It's the return.
And I do think it is important to try to get the message out there that this is an Arizona issue. We don't want, we all, what happens, in one part of the state does have a effect on other parts of the state. And so we do need to be concerned about how the messages are given, about what's happening in this area versus what's happening in other areas.
I like what you're saying.
Okay.
I do. That's good. That's good. Okay.
All right, I will make those changes and send out the update.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, you guys have done a great job. Thank you so much.
And we need to figure out when is the time we want to pass it on.
Yeah, we need to get it to the other committees pretty quickly. So,
but
to the degree
we're going to need to have a lot of
qualifiers.
Yes.
A statement.
And perhaps we should schedule a meeting
Yeah, we can. Let's try to get a meeting scheduled pretty quickly,
depending
on your ability to get the. I don't want to.
Sounds good.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. All right. So are we ready for?
Yeah. So, if we could maybe just have, I don't know, Ron, if you just want to kind of give what you guys sort of went through in that process and
with the
WRDC
finance.
And Martin,
I'd be happy to. I wasn't. I attended several of the finance committee meetings. I wasn't really on the finance committee with the WRDC. I was involved in the supply and demand numbers that came out of that group at that time. But I don't know, what do you have put together?
Just kind of, all of you in this room probably are very aware of this stuff, but just what the WRDC looked at and the formation of the 4 committees. One of those committees was the Finance Committee, of course. And then a lot of text going through their summary that came out of the final report.
Okay. Well, I'd be glad to kind of go through some of the potential sources of revenue, and I think most of you probably have a copy of this in the information that went out. This is actually from the Finance Committee report, and they were trying to come up with something that would be a statewide source of revenue that could be used by any water provider in the state to develop new water resources. They looked at several possibilities, and if you have this sheet, it has a projection of estimated revenue for, back then it was 2020, 2035, 2060, and 2110 as far as using numbers that were available when the WRDC Finance Committee met. They projected those numbers out and were able to come up with these projected revenue numbers. One was a bottled water tax of, there was two iterations looked at, 2 cents per bottle, 5 cents per bottle. It would go to, at that time, I think we were anticipating that funding the Water Supply Development Revolving Fund. And you can see that looking at 2035, the bottled water tax would generate like $0.75 billion if it was 2 cents per bottle. And if it were 5 cents per bottle, $1.9 billion, which is a fairly significant amount of money for water augmentation projects. There was not support to move forward with a bottled water tax. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of opposition from Nestle's of the world, whoever owns the major water bottling companies, and we can expect that to be a fairly significant battle trying to get our legislature to approve something like that.
On that, there was a bill that was
Right.
introduced, but even before this conversation.
Yes.
The WRDC, where the department, and it was really the conversation was focused on partially funding the department.
From the bottled water tax.
From the
That's
bottled
right.
water
I
tax.
remember that now.
Because that was, at the time, Governor Brewer was wanting agencies, there was discussion about getting agencies off of the general fund and trying to move on to, trying to find ways to fund agencies or self-fund agencies. And so
You were fee-based.
Yeah. And so that bottled water, I don't know if it failed because it was a funding source for the department, but Nestle, Coca-Cola, we had all the local folks who came out and essentially that bill died in committee, I think, if I recall correctly. So there was some history on that. I think the conversation was focused more on augmentation projects, and I don't know if that distinction between funding the agency versus funding augmentation projects was really
And this would be the first bottled water tax, because there's been other areas of the country that have enacted bottled water taxes.
Yeah.
I don't know if they're still in place. I know last time I did some research on it, some of the taxes had been enacted, and then they had canceled them for some reason or later on.
Yeah.
I don't know. Personally, 2 cents a bottle for bottled water, I mean, what's the big deal? But obviously, it's a big deal.
That was a big deal.
To some people.
Let's test that.
Yeah.
Well, having paid $6 for a bottle of water last night.
Oh, at a ball game or something?
Yeah. It's like, I'm not necessarily opposed to still looking at this.
I think any of the funding sources are going to be tough.
Is that a U of A baseball game or something? No, it was a concert.
I thought I could go one day without hearing that word.
So, the bottled water tax was just one of the proposals that came out of the committee. Another was a transaction privilege tax, and that was based on a 5-cent or 10-cent per 1,000-gallon tax on water. And that would basically generate a 2035 $0.9 billion to $1.8 billion, kind of close to what the bottled water tax would generate. Again, it's a tax. Nobody wanted to, there was no interest in anybody picking up the ball and running with it. A new development tax, a statewide development tax was one of the recommendations, and that would be a scenario where growth pays for growth, which a lot of local governments like to hear, that growth is paying for growth. It doesn't necessarily, and I was thinking about that a little bit, and it doesn't necessarily take into account the economic benefits that growth brings with it to the established residents there. So that was looked at $250 per lot and $500 per lot based on 600 lots per year, I think, 6,000 lots per year, I'm sorry. And that would generate actually considerably less, 0.056 billion to 0.113 billion by 2035. That particular recommendation, I went back and looked at some work that we did years ago, back in 2004, for the Arizona Water Policy Group, and the recommendation that came out of that group, likewise, was a $250 per lot. Strange, it was the same amount, development fee, an impact fee, but that didn't make it very far either. A well fee, and this is where you get all the opposition from all the private well owners, and what was being considered at that time was a $50 fee for a new well and an annual $10 fee for an existing well, versus another option, a $100 fee for a new well and $20 annual fee for an existing well. Likewise, that didn't generate the funds that the TPT generated, or the bottled water tax. That was .062 to .124 billion by 2035. And finally, a general fund appropriation of $10 million from the general fund on an annual basis, and that was anticipated to come up with $376 billion by 2035. There have been a couple of attempts that I'm aware of appropriations from the general fund to go to the Water Supply Development Revolving Fund, and none of them made it. As I recall, several years ago, Speaker Tobin tried to put $30 million in there initially.
Yeah, he's taking it from Growing Smarter.
That is why.
Well, the statewide water augmentation group, SWAG, I think Senator Flake at the time did put money into that fund.
Yeah.
Then it got swept.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So there was, I can't remember the number that was in there. Cheryl, do you remember?
10 million?
I don't think so.
Yeah, was it that
3
million?
I think it was like
I think there was another attempt to put 10 million in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that there was. I mean,
But it
Tobin
never-
tried.
Yeah, Tobin.
He was always trying to take the Growing Smarter money.
To my knowledge, none of it's ever
Annual
made it.
visit.
So
There have been past. There was one success getting money in there. Then during the budget shoots, it got swept.
Something like
That sounds right. Yeah. There's a 3 in there somewhere.
or 5. It was
13.
So that kind of summarizes the recommendations that did come out of the Finance Committee. They also looked at public-private partnerships that do have some potential. It kind of gets back a lot of it to when is the money going to be needed for projects. Well, the private entities are going to come to the table. They came to the table for the Finance Committee, but they were ready to go, and nobody else was really ready to go for projects at that time. There may be some projects in the state that are getting close to being ready to go.
Yeah.
I can think of Red Gap Ranch for one, for Flagstaff. That's probably going to be, and I haven't looked at any numbers in several years, but that's going to be a $300-400 million project easily. And what's that impact going to be on Flagstaff's water rates if they try to fund that conventionally, if they can fund it conventionally? And I know municipalities deal with the cap on how much debt they can enter into as well. So I don't even know if they can do something like that. Another interesting project is the Payson project, because that one is moving, and they're biting the bullet in Payson, to my knowledge, and they're saying now they're willing to enter into these higher fees in the future to pay for it, and they're having to build a water plant and the pipelines and everything from C.C. Cragen. So that's an interesting case study there, where they are actually moving ahead on their own. Would that work for Flagstaff? I don't know, because look at the new numbers.
I think that list of projects, if I remember correctly, the table, did it have in there, where they were? It looked like their different feasibility studies and all that. I mean, I don't remember. I mean, that would be good to know.
The big list?
Yeah.
Was generated?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I think to that point, going back to the ready and willing, depending on where these big projects are in their studies, that would be helpful.
Would you like to see that list?
No, but I'm just saying in general. But there may have been a column for that, I can't remember, but some of them were, because we didn't select.
Yeah.
So some of them were like $500,000.
Some of them were just really pie in the sky.
I'm not sure if they
massive. San Pedro, we were like 2-3 studies in. I know you guys were.
I'm not sure if it did designate where they were in the process. I think it was just putting it all on one big list.
Okay.
I think though, if we were able to identify preferably more than just one, but
Yeah.
maybe like 1, 2, or 3 projects that could go right away.
Because they'll be ready for federal money, they'll be ready
That then, because I remember the problem with the list was everyone would kind of look at it and their eyes would glaze over because they saw the thing, and they're like, oh, you're wanting to do all of this? And it's like, no, we're not doing this all right now.
They got really hung up on that.
Yeah.
We all did. Yeah.
Because I just think that's a way to, frankly, then go into the next level of prioritize rightness, maybe.
I guess I wonder if we'll be able to move a substantive finance idea forward until you have, like, hey, these are 3 projects that we're trying to accomplish, and so we need now to have money in the system development, the water...
Whatever, revolving fund.
Yeah, the revolving fund and such. So,
because what you're going to end up finding, assuming this has to go to a ballot, you're going to have these rural projects, but it's not going to pass. You're going to need one in the voting areas where the populations are too.
well, and maybe this is why this is important.
It's the reality.
No, it's helpful. The reality is the reality.
And maybe this is where Bob's committee's going to help with, because if 1, 2, or 3 desalination projects are identified, and then we can, moving parts.
Yeah. At some point, we're going to have to come back to that list.
Yes.
So maybe for the next meeting.
The project list.
Yeah, the project list.
I'm happy to pull it up right now if anyone would.
Oh, God, no.
No.
It's been a long enough week.
It's happening again.
But
we can send.
I'll add just a little bit.
Yeah.
To Warren's point, the funding that we have in the budget right now for what is basically the precursor to DCP Plus, it's because a lot of groundwork, a lot of detail was fleshed out in basically coming up with a project idea for something that people can get their head around. Then you go pitch the idea to...
But it was concrete.
Right.
Very concrete, very ripe, as Cheryl said, for moving forward. That list was just everybody's
It was a wish
dream.
list.
And so,
Inflated it.
Yeah.
It wasn't crazy.
But it was, I think the point and the realities are well made, and we need to sort of focus down a bit on those. And if we can line those up with the committees and what they're working on, they have some.
It's the difference between we have a great imagination and capturing somebody's imagination.
Yeah.
There's a possibility here. It takes this amount. Let's find the path to that amount.
That's really helpful, Hunter, because I think that's sort of a question that's lingering out there. What is, where's is there willingness to move? Just to be frank, is the governor willing to move some of these projects forward?
Yes. I mean, if you look at, I'll just say this, if you look at the governor's proposed budget, the dominant factor is education, but we carved out $6 million over 3 years for DCP Plus now.
Yeah.
$6 million in a water infrastructure project is basically, we're going to get the feasibility study done, but
If you're lucky.
if you're lucky, yeah.
But it's a start.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's important, and showing that willingness, I think, helps the committee, this committee and other committees, kind of get a grasp on what we're willing to, I think sometimes we're tiptoeing around not knowing.
I think what you can derive from what occurred in this last budget is from what Tom did with a lot of the people here and working, with me in our budget office, get the groundwork laid, we'll find some money. But when we're talking in terms of decimal points on billions, that's a different line.
But I think it goes to also the list the governor put together for Trump infrastructure.
Yeah.
Which may be, whether that's going to happen or not, but it'd be helpful to know how that list got put together too.
The request was shovel-ready projects.
Yeah.
It wasn't, what would you dream up? It
Yeah.
was, what could you...
If you got the money this year, fiscal year.
You could probably turn it this fiscal year.
And I think that's where we need to think as well,
Yeah.
Yeah, we could look at all sources of this.
and where they are in their planning scheme.
Do you think, just talking really hypothetical now, let's suppose that the desalination committee comes up with 2 or 3 projects that really could be pursued. They'll need seed money, they're going to need work. You could maybe get some from the local communities, but probably it'll boil down to also a willingness of the state to invest. And let's say maybe that George's committee on long-term augmentation comes up with maybe one project out there or looking at that. Do you think there would be a willingness to look at some type, to say, hey, here's the projects, we need to pursue this, but we're going to need some type of long-term funding, and it might need to be statewide. And that conversation may take more than just one legislative session to get people comfortable. But do you think there would be even a willingness to maybe even go down that path?
So you've strung them together like 4 hypotheticals.
I know.
But the short answer is yes.
Yeah.
What else could we do?
Yeah.
If we're going to take long-term water solutions seriously, I mean, I think of all the work that's being done in GWAC right now, in terms of projects, the desalination committee and what they're doing, they're moving. They've grabbed the ball, and I recognize that. This is a companion piece to how do you ostensibly make that more real. So we'd have to have that conversation.
Well,
and it's a commitment to even putting the GWAC together.
That's
volumes on the governor.
But it's I think, that's what I've heard from it. But I think it's important to be reminded of that, because I'm just recalling back to the WRDC. When we had sometimes the financial discussion, it was like just throwing it out. Well, why are we even talking about bottled water tax? That never would even fly. Well,
it wasn't a commitment.
Right. So that's where it's like, well, let's just not say, well, the political climate is just not willing to look at it. It's like, no, we can change the political climate if you do it carefully and right.
Right. So to Cheryl's point about the infrastructure requests, if this had happened 10 years ago or 5 years ago, we would have had maybe not the package, but if tracks were converging, I probably would have recommended, hey, let's take a shot. We've got some things on paper. It's a big project, but it's a shot. And what would we compare to in other things in other states? If the Trump administration sees, well, it's a pretty good deal right there. Why not?
Right.
But so to string the 3 or 4 hypotheticals together, it's where we would need to be to make a proposal in the governor's budget to then go thumb wrestle with the legislature and say, here's a good policy here that we should resource.
Well, that's helpful. I always worry about us as we sit around the table and try to come up with ideas of shooting down ideas too quickly because we think that it couldn't succeed, and it's like,
we got to get away from that. I agree with you. And the experts on that are somewhere else, except for Hunter and Cheryl.
Good. Yeah. So one of the ways that we deal with policy questions, big policy questions, and kind of the dreams, is the governor's told us, dream big, and we'll reel you back in.
Yeah.
You got to take that with a grain of salt to some degree, but we have a process in which we take ideas, we kind of wash them through the lower level staff, and then we go to the senior staff and we say, tell us now, before we keep going, you like this or you don't. Think about the political realities. I've sat in rooms where they said, yeah, we think that it's a great idea, but it would never go through our legislature. We should look at similar type of, try to problem solve on that issue still, but you're probably not going to be able to go down that particular route. So, just being very candid.
No,
Yeah.
appreciate that. Great.
I think one thing that are out there that may be helpful, if you look at how ADOT, probably I guess all transportation, but I'll pick on ADOT because that's what I know, they have their 5-year and 20-year. They have their 5-year plan, which matches up to federal. Then they have their 20-year vision. And I'm kind of viewing the GWAC as what ADOT does, that we will have that list, and it's really, and then it matches up with federal, state, the MAG money, PAG money, and all that. That's kind of where we need to go. Now, the transportation people are running in the same buzzsaw and looking at these same funding sources, and they don't have gas tax. So getting across the finish line is still even a problem for them, but I don't even think we're organized enough.
Yeah. And I would just point out one thing related to this. I'm not a finance expert. I'm not even a water expert. I'm trying to be better every day. I spend a lot of time every day trying to be better in water. But the thing that's interesting about the water discussion and projects is there is an ROI.
Exactly.
You don't just, it's not like paving a road and then the road's going to degrade and you got to go pave the road again. The pipes are going to degrade and stuff's going to happen, but there is some aspect of this that you can make some return which does entice investment. That's a different animal than building a state building or paving a road. There's a different aspect to that, which
It's really good.
So, how do we know where that is the case? How do we think about that in a smart way? Because we can point to examples of water development that didn't return what it was promised to return. So where do we go to think in a smart way about the ROI? That's
Joe Geisel's on our...
Well, I agree. I mean, that's part of the reason I think looking at private equity is when, if it stinks to them, we should think about that, right? I mean, as a state.
Go back to that map. That, to me, that's the best tool we've got.
I'm sorry if I derailed the conversation.
No, this is important. I think it's valuable.
Because when I look at that map,
yeah,
it's just me, it's like, okay, are you getting water for people or ag or,
right.
That's what that's all going to be
right.
about.
And we know that the CAP service area will continue to probably have an ROI if we continue to provide enough water for economic growth in that service area. And there are probably some other places in the state where that's the case. But, we've just done a survey of corporate site locators nationally to find out what water portfolio they want to see before they do, when they are making investment decisions. And it's very clear that, if they're looking at Arizona, they're going to focus on the Sun Corridor. And no matter how much water we make available in other parts of the state, no matter how much some of these parts of the state dream of having a corporate headquarters, it's not going to happen because of other attributes that those people look at. So,
but for businesses, this isn't rocket science kind of stuff here, right? They're going to look at what it takes, what's the infrastructure, what's the cost, what's the O&M cost, and CapEx cost, and
how quick can I get money?
Oh, that's right.
Can I get it? And so they lay that out. If it works, they're on board, and they're going to be pushing you to make it happen, right? If it doesn't work for them, they're just going to tell you, no, there's not a chance. And so, it is literally going out and making the connection, and you go out and get several different partners. You let them bid on it, different technology, and then see where you want to go.
So that would be true if we were building in the sort of P3 or private equity thinking to augmentation?
I think it's going to be a combination of things. I mean, me personally, I look at this and say some areas are just ripe for that.
Yeah.
Some areas, there's not a chance. That's just not going to work.
Yeah.
And so we're going to take all this information and overlay it and look at, so what is the opportunity for us to do in this area? What is the opportunity here? How do we communicate this effectively in messages and sell the state on what our strategy is? But we got to develop the strategy first, right? And it's got to be, to your point, a smart strategy that it's easy for us to go communicate this and keep it at a high enough level that we can sell people that this is the right thing to do.
I'll give you an example. Our state park system. Totally off topic. Everybody's eyes might glaze over at this point, but here's exactly what happened 2 weeks ago. Our state parks director feels like we don't have enough state parks. We have at least 3 properties along Lake Havasu that could be developed, but haven't been. And they did the numbers, they did a business plan, and they were able to show, conservatively, if you invest X amount of dollars, you'll have an ROI. Basically, you'll pay off the project and you'll start making money on this park after 3 years, and that park after 2.5, and that park after 4. And here's how many campsites we would have, and here's how many cabins, and here's our groceries and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, in year 7, it's just making money. And you pitch that to the senior staff in the governor's office, and they look at it and they ask their questions and they say, okay, keep going. That's essentially, am I wrong?
Because the DSAL, I think business plan, hypothetically, it can have city investment. It's going to have all kinds of people to see that opportunity. Yeah.
There's definitely opportunity.
Yeah. And the private.
Yeah. There's going to be parts of the state that it's going to be tough.
Correct.
There's going to be parts of the state where may take advantage of settling claims. I mean, there's all kinds of there's different opportunities in different areas of the states, and I mean, I think we should keep our minds open to what's in the best interest of us as a state overall.
Yeah, there's so many challenges to all of this. I mean, it's not just funding. I mean, the land base, the land ownership is going to be a huge problem.
I mean, it is. I mean, that's why it is the communication strategy. When any of us or all of us go talk to a particular community, some of them will be real receptive. I mean, this is maybe my rose-colored glasses. Maybe one of them will be real receptive anyway. Many of them will be, well, what's this for? Is this really just this big white area there?
Yep.
Are you coming to take my water?
Yep.
Mm-hmm. And, I mean, that's what I expect to hear. So how do you combat that? That's going to take some thought.
So just to go along with this free-flowing.
Yeah, no, it's good. I mean, this is good.
To go a little bit off of what Bob was saying, could it be beneficial for this committee to maybe come up with I don't know the right term, principles, maybe talking points about what the importance of looking at the finance for augmentation projects is, because it's important for the state, kind of some of the things we were talking about earlier, that what happens in one part of the state happens elsewhere, and something where we can kind of start addressing, even with our fellow council members, about the importance of, I guess it's reiterating the whole reason that we're even here is water's important for Arizona, and we need to be looking.
Well, we had the discussion at the full GWAC about the communication strategy. Is that something that fits into there, or is it this
No, I was looking at it
into the overall communication strategy?
I guess I was looking at it more from the financial side of that. Why would you want to even consider looking at something state? That's because it goes back to the comments that Ron was making about, well, why are you wanting me to pay for something over there?
Yeah.
And just kind of trying to...
Especially when water comes out of my tap every day, you know.
Yeah, why do I need to worry about...
Why should I be worried about this?
Yeah.
Why should I care about what's happening in Cochise or in Flagstaff?
Well, the conversation that we're having today, having sat through how many hundreds of hours of these types of conversations in the past, this is the most positive that I've heard ever. And just to be blunt, I mean, this is, I think the conversation is much more proactive and much more forward-thinking than I've ever heard in all my years sitting through these things. And maybe, go ahead.
Madam Chair, can I ask you a question? In all of the meetings that you've been in, have you ever had a sit-down where somebody who's actually built a water project, have they ever so my closest example, I've sat in a room with Joe Geisel and just listened to him talk about how they invest. And it wasn't how they built, it was how they invest.
Yeah.
Do we know anybody that...
Yeah, and I think that's it. Well, there's a range of those. You've got private, entities who do one path. You've got public utility, and then you've got
I'm also wondering if
and I think that would be
just to be the capitalist in the room for a second. I think understanding how capitalism works in this is really crucial.
Yeah, hold on, Sarah, before you go.
So I've sat down with a couple of different entities already to talk to them about what are you looking for? What is your strategy here? How do you approach this? There's one of interest over in Texas that just developed co-located a plant with the El Paso desal facility to take their waste stream. And instead of just wasting it and injecting it and trying to dispose of it, to turn it into chemicals, and then being able to market and sell that. So at the end of the day, there's no waste stream. Totally green project, right? Philip turned us on to that from a multi-state salinity meeting. And so we spoke to them and talked to them about, if you're looking for an investment, and here's the chemistry I'm looking at, and here's the quantity of water I'm looking at, and how much, off the top of your head, I know this isn't, committed to stone, what do you think the cost of the water would be to the market? And he was like $3 a thousand, which is $1,000 an acre foot, which, I mean, when you talk about public water supply, I mean, that's pretty much in line with what the City of Phoenix rates are and municipality rates are. Yeah. But he's making money on the product he's developing on the other end of that plant, too, to put to market the chemicals that he's able to sell. So it offsets that cost of the product. He's able to sell that chemical, and we don't have to do evap ponds and deep well injection or some disposal methodology.
But you don't have, I mean, the whole issue with P3 is needing the public source to pay back to the investor, so that's even less. Yeah. That's because he's making money off it.
So I would think that I love the idea of, like, getting those kinds of people to come and talk about that or get their thoughts in a report. I also think I am wondering if Texas or Florida have guidance, because they have state-backed bond funding for utilities. I know that was reported on, but how do they decide what project is worthy of a loan? Because that is part of the whole analysis that we're thinking about here. How do they know when it's a good financing opportunity for programs?
Yeah, and we at our last meeting we had that, the presentation
and I've read those slides.
The DWR did on the how they got the funding, into that how they developed that, but going beyond that, we talked about how they chose, how they chose what to fund.
In Texas, with those regional water resources, groundwater conservation districts, I can't remember the exact title, but because they have regional control, and by regional it's very localized, the counties are much smaller in Texas, those regional authorities make those decisions. So there's a state fund, and those regional authorities can apply for that money, or I don't know if it's allocated to them directly. I'm not sure how that connection is made.
I think there's a plan, there's an overall plan.
Let me finish real quick. Just,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and so those actual projects, okay, like this is how much it's going to cost, we can start building it this year, we need money for it. Those kind of projects that are ready to go are approved by those localized districts. So I don't know if there's like a board of directors that votes on it or how exactly that works, but it's done on a small scale. So it doesn't go to the state government, and the state government makes the decision.
But since they're state-backed bonds, as I understand it, I expect that the lender, the state, has some kind of criteria that each of those funding opportunities would have to satisfy. So Wacko County in Midland, Texas, or whatever, I don't want to pick on Midland, but Plano, if there's some like Wacko Water Authority, I'm sure that there's some criteria that the state funder could look at and say, sorry, you don't satisfy these. And so that's kind of what I'm getting at, like how...
That makes sense.
It's similar to WIPA.
Yeah. And that might be a start for thinking about, I'm sure that in there must be some kind of idea.
Yeah, and I think that's important, but I also, sort of going back to the real basics.
Yeah.
How does somebody fund a project, and are there ideas of projects, going back to Hunter's, the capitalist point of view, is there...
It's not a dirty word. I
love it. I look in the mirror and say capitalist. I'm good with it. I'm good with it, but are there examples of that? And Sarah, I think that criteria, I think we've got a really good local example of somebody who can probably give us sort of that and the criteria and all that, and I think that's important. But getting to how do you fund a project? I think that would be useful information for this group.
I think there's two different, the type Bob was talking about.
Yes. Well, the transportation. Yeah.
When you have projects,
on the private side,
a lot of projects that deal with treatment and stuff, the augmentation
whole different animal
is
We did one basin project. Pipeline for 15 million. So we'd be happy to talk about.
Was that 50, the total for Basin, including the water plant and everything?
Yeah, about 46.
Yeah.
So it might be good to have, have WIFA and also have Payson come in and I think SRP and
Buzz would be happy to.
Yeah, Buzz would love it. He'd be like, "Not to go to Phoenix again?"
I have to do it in July.
We do.
In July.
In July. Now you're thinking.
I really think getting to what does an investor want? And I guess the question is, everybody around this room, if I asked you, who has great thinking on a good AMA policy, everybody would know 3 people to call. When it comes to we've got to find outside of our network of great minds. You've struck out into Texas and found something. I don't know how you developed that connection, but
pick up the phone and start calling.
Yeah, it's a novel idea.
So Cheryl and Bob, maybe that's something we can set up.
I'm texting with them. Hopefully has one.
And bringing in WIFA is also a good idea.
The flip side, I think getting.
We have a few finance people in our company.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, you guys develop projects all the time, right?
Yeah.
I mean, even there's probably tons of crossover between.
I would think.
Just something that comes to mind with the private investment. Let's take as an example, a project that's going to develop 6,000 acre feet of water. And I'm an investor, and I'll say, okay, I'll finance that project. How much of that water do you think that investor is going to want to be sold as soon as that project goes online?
Meaning?
6,000 acre feet of water.
Okay.
He's going to want to sell all that water. The recipient of the water, though, being as this project was built to anticipate future needs, may not be able to utilize all that water unless there's another scenario where they would be able to shut down existing facilities and use the existing facilities to accommodate future growth.
Maybe.
So just something.
I think there's a bias towards private investment because that's the thought that they want an immediate return on their investment. I disagree.
I know on the real estate development side, they're looking at 30 years, I mean, it's tied with bonds, it's, I don't even know. But, it's like, it's, they have these spreadsheets, they're pro formas. If it doesn't match up and, there's changes, all these, they're looking at, usually, I don't know.
And there's not, and I'm not thinking hedge funds, what's the other one that we often get, contacts from are,
pension funds.
Pension funds, yes. So they're looking for longer term.
And Chinese
terms. Yeah.
Understanding the project and understanding the contract that you put in place and how you're going to structure it. So
I think a presentation on public-private funding would be very helpful. There are definitely.
You understand what I'm saying?
I understand exactly, but I think what you're looking at also, I think we need to look at, there are local private entities who look long-term.
Yeah.
Freeport-McMoran, APS. We're not looking for an immediate return. We're looking to we get other things out of it.
As long as they can get that long-term back without selling all 6,000 acres.
Well, but what's the long-term back? The long-term back may be other opportunities as well.
Right.
Less public pressure. That's a return on an investment. I think we got to stop looking at return on investment as dollars. It's not always dollars out of that project.
Good point. And if you're doing it for real estate development and you can scale up as demand grows, there are many advantages for a developer to maybe be part of the one of the investors in an augmentation project.
We do it all the time.
Yeah, I know. My fabulous report.
The first project, the HoHoCom were the first project in the state, but SRP, I don't think SRP envisioned when it originally started that in 1970 or 80 or 90 they would migrate towards municipal uses the way it has. I don't know if they did or not, but
I've just been reading about that, and especially about the Kent Decree, my new favorite subject. But when Roosevelt Dam opened, you probably all know that Theodore Roosevelt went for the inauguration of the dam, and Will Rogers was there, and he said, if this were my reservoir, I would sweep it.
And mow it.
I'd mow it, because it didn't have any water in it. So think about how that had to scale up. And there were still 4,500 landowners downstream in the valley that needed their water every year for their crops. And so everybody knew it was going to take a long time for this reservoir project to pay off. It's kind of interesting when you think about that timeline.
And I've raised it with you several times, but when we start going down these, especially the P3 funding side, is to look at the legal limitations we have, like our constitutional bonding limit, number one. But more importantly, on the smaller side,
laws are made to be changed.
The money. Who can assess who's to be in charge of all that? These other things we have to think about.
Yes. No, and
I'm not saying we have to address it, but we need that list of legal impediments.
That's part of the conversation. It needs to be part of the overview that we need to hear. So we can identify barriers to some of these things. Like I said, I usually say laws are meant to be broken, but technically they're meant to be improved.
Already on the impediment, so
they're meant to be improved. fit what we need to do.
Need to look at.
Sandy, it would be good if we could try to pull in some experts, and then we start getting into all those issues. They would help
What
point
did they
those
run
out.
into? Yeah. So if, in the interest of perhaps getting to concrete items that we can start looking at, I had 2 paths, now I've got 3 paths. So we've got a path of looking at, and Cheryl and Bob, of understanding how infrastructure is funded and what does an investor want? What are they looking for? We've got 2 potential projects, or 2 potential ideas there, I think, that we could bring forward. We still have 2 other paths, so specific projects. Maybe trying to get to this idea of specific projects. So we've got what the DSAL committee's doing, and then maybe the list of more concrete projects out of the WRDC list. What's sort of ripe? Red Gap Ranch, the Payson C.C. Cragen example. I think it'd be maybe good to have maybe both or those folks. What's the impact going to be to Flagstaff ratepayers?
Yeah, I don't know how much they've dug into that yet.
Yeah.
But it is it's a project that's rolling, and they're finishing up their feasibility. They've got the land, they've got the water, they've finally got the right-of-way from ADOT for the pipeline.
That was a huge hurdle.
They need to start the design, which is going to probably take a couple of years.
Does it need environmental?
And any environmental work that hasn't already been done. They have had environmental work done on the ranch itself, I believe, but anything...
But the whole pipe.
Yeah, the pipe.
That was the one success out of the vision. And then the C.C. Cragen, maybe a joint presentation with Buzz and WIFA, I think might be helpful.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm asking you guys to help me. Help me.
I'm going to be with the flag folks next week, I think, and I don't know, maybe Brad would be glad to come and talk about where
Brad
they're
would
at
love it.
with
Tell Brad he's
with the
coming.
financing on the project.
Yeah.
Okay.
He has no choice.
All right.
And then the other sort of path is specific funding sources. The TPT, the bottled water tax. Do we want to look at things and understand those better, or is it we want to really focus more on things that are actually being done or can be done?
I would suggest trying to get some folks that really understand finances.
Well, TPT to me I kept asking, what's the toilet paper tax? So, which I actually think is a good idea because everybody uses it, I hope. I don't know what the heck it is. I don't know what it means.
But I guess what I'm saying, as far as an order of approaching, I think bringing in finance folks first, understanding what kind of investment they're looking for. That will also play into, what kind of investment would the state be looking for, which then...
And they'll have examples from other states.
Which would be a good segue then into the more specific funding ideas.
And doesn't it seem like if there were a project that were so compelling, like so obvious and compelling, it would be a lot easier to get any one of these passed than a sort of done project. So,
and odds are, to me, I'm just thinking ahead, it's going to be a list. That's how it's just sent to the ballot. These hypotheticals. That's how you usually have to do these.
Is there any way to scratch the surface on, we know in terms of projects, one that keeps coming up is DSAL? Is there a way to look for people who have funded and done all the calisthenics on a DSAL? It sounds like you're already there.
Yeah, we've got the Well, San Diego, we have.
Can we just go right to the heart of?
That's Ocean DSAL.
There's examples here in our state with people that we have relationships with.
Sean Bradford.
Yeah. There's a couple people. Yeah. The Payson example or the Flagstaff example. Those aren't as I understand it, those aren't desal.
No.
They were financing.
They hope it's not desal.
Yeah.
Right.
It's going to add a layer of cost.
But I think at some point we should try to sink a hook and get somebody in here to talk to us about desal and what they did.
Yeah.
Do that.
Yeah.
Goodyear has desal.
Yeah,
they're doing.
Bradford at EPCOR was at Goodyear at the time, so he can do kind of double duty.
That's local desal though,
Yeah.
right? And is that what you're talking about?
I'm just, if we're going to go down the path of exploring this, if we're going to work out the technical and we're going to work out the other stuff, if there's stuff that people learn related to financing a desal plant that maybe is different than financing a canal or financing a pipeline, it'd be good to know.
Is that part of your, what you can bring?
Part of my assignment that you...
Part of yours? Hunter gave it to you, let's be clear.
Madam Chair, I'm just a humble public servant trying to learn what I can.
You know, we hear all the time too that ocean desal, it's too extensive, it's not doable. Are we ever going to look at that?
That's...
Because it's not.
In my scope.
Yeah.
The director has asked me to focus on inland brackish water until he changes my mission.
But from the funding side of it, do we want to look at that? Because we can bring, we've got examples of that, and where you're moving water 200 miles,
I think
10,000 feet into the air.
we should look at everything
Yeah.
from a funding perspective and be just the whole gamut of how do we fund anything, whether it's storage or Marines Group and augmentation or ocean desal or anything else. My 2 cents. Or in John's group on, the
Reuse.
Yeah.
Okay.
Where do you want to go?
I do want to point out that Ron did a great job of summarizing everything I was going to do.
I know. I'm sorry.
I appreciate that very much. I was nervous because I knew you all knew it better than I did.
No, but I think it's good that you've got the presentation. I think we still need to keep the presentation out there because there are questions. There's a lot of questions sort of behind some of that stuff. What stopped it? Why wasn't a TPT toilet paper tax ever discussed? Why was what killed the bottled water? What killed from the discussion? I still think the toilet paper tax is a good idea.
First time I heard that, I actually went right there too, Sandy. So.
There might be some hygiene issues that militate against the toilet paper tax. Let's just put it out there.
I am so tired of doubters. Everybody uses it. Everybody uses it. It's fair.
keep TP affordable.
I can put it on the website.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful to have it still on the website, the presentation.
Sounds good.
And everybody take a look at it too. I mean, we didn't get all the way through it, but I think there's some good.
Oh yeah.
There's good information in there that we need to be aware of. All right. All right. So next meeting, we want the update on the
data analysis.
Data analysis.
Okay.
Yeah. And could you add the map, the updated map, to the? You can embed it in that spreadsheet. That would be great. Just put it on one of the worksheets. I think that would be helpful, just so we have it all in one little concise spot.
Sounds good.
And then for presentations on sort of what, I think we focus first on projects that are, look for funding. So I think, Bob, if we can get, or Cheryl,
We could kind of work together to
that'd be great.
a couple of different perspectives on
Definitely.
things.